Hello everyone, FPL Raptor here and welcome back to another video on my YouTube channel. In today's video we have my Game Week 28 deadline decisions. This is a weekly series where I discuss your final questions and dilemmas before the deadline. If you do enjoy today's video, please do smash that like button, and if you're new around here, make sure to subscribe as well. But without further ado, let's jump into it. As always, let's start with those Friday afternoon press conference updates around the key players and injuries as well. Of course, we do get news trickling throughout Friday going into the evening, so there might be, as of you watching this, further updates. If there is anything that comes up on Friday evening or Saturday morning, we will discuss it on the Saturday morning deadline stream. So hopefully see as many of you there as possible. But as of Friday afternoon at 3 p.m, here are the key updates. Let's start with that man, Eddie Howe. And this is, of course, going to be my weekly Eddie Howe slander. Those of you that have watched the videos for a while now know that I do slander Eddie Howe every week, mainly because he does lie in press conferences. And there are some managers that do conceal the truth. Eddie Howe just flat out lies quite often. And so when he says something in a press conference, I jokingly often say it's probably the complete opposite. And it sometimes is the complete opposite. So I wouldn't even say take what he says with a pinch of salt. I would say it's almost likely to be incorrect. So what he said was that Alexander Isak is fit and that he's been training all week. This might be one of those where he's technically telling the truth, because we did see pictures of Isak in training on Wednesday. He wasn't wearing shin pads. He wasn't seen pictured with any other players. It was just him running and with a ball at his feet. To me, it looked very much like individual training, but Howe's saying that Isak is fit. So let's go on the basis that Eddie Howe is being truthful. Then Alexander Isak should be fine for Game Week 28. I just have some reservations because it is Isak, who we know doesn't have the best injury record. They've got the cup final coming up very soon, which is incredibly important to them. Wilson's got a great record, by the way, against West Ham. This does feel like, is it worth risking him? So I still have reservations as to whether Isak will be fit to start. Normally with Alexander Isak, and maybe I still believe this, but normally what you would say is that if he's fit, he'll start, and if he's not, he won't make the squad. There's usually very little risk of someone like Alexander Isak cameoing, getting minutes off the bench. I just feel like in this situation, if he is pretty much fit, but they don't want to risk him, there is a world, I think, and it's very rare, where Isak could travel with the squad, see how they get on without him, and if they really need him off the bench, because they are still obviously going for Europe in the league, then of course he could come off the bench. So there is a risk here, and I can't sit here and confidently say that I think Isak will start the game. In my own team, and I think in most people's teams, it's probably just one of those where you just start him and hope. I don't think there are many teams where your team will be that strong that you can comfortably bench him, and I don't think I necessarily would anyway. And most people that are selling Isak over the coming weeks, it's probably next week to afford Haaland. So I just think in most people's situations this week, regardless of the news that we get from Howe and whether it's true or not, you probably just keep and start Isak. Let me know what you think of it down below. But the objective news from Eddie Howe is that Isak should be fine. Maybe I'm overthinking it. Lewis Hall is confirmed out for the season, which is gutting for him and also for Newcastle as well. Botman will be out for 8 weeks. The reason that I mentioned Hall being out for the season and Botman being out for 8 weeks, that back four for Newcastle pretty much picks itself. When Trippier's fit, it's Trippier at right back, Livramento left back, and then Burn and Fabian Schär as the centre-backs. It makes, for me, Livramento a really interesting option on the Game Week 31 wildcard, which we'll discuss in the coming weeks. And, of course, Anthony Gordon is suspended. On Jean-Philippe Mateta, as we did expect, he will not be available for Game Week 28. So Glasner said Mateta is doing well. He is at home recovering well. He had no fractures or concussion, which is good. So there is no concussion there. It's just obviously due to the stitches. So he will go to Marbella with us next week and train individually. If all goes to plan, he will be available versus Fulham. He also went on to say that his mum travelled over, I think, from France to England to look after Mateta, which I thought was very sweet. But good to see that Mateta is okay after that horrific challenge. But we're not going to have him for Game Week 28. But if you are on like free hit 29, or you can bench Mateta in 29, there's a good chance he's back available for Southampton in Game Week 30. On Liverpool, we're actually going to discuss Liverpool in a bit more detail in the next section, because there was quite a long quote from Arne Slot about rotation, which I'd like to discuss. But on Cody Gakpo, as of today, apparently he was unable to train yesterday, which would have been Thursday, and it remains to be seen whether he will train on the Friday. He said it will be a close call as to whether the forward features against Southampton. He did also go on to say that it's definitely not a serious or long-term injury. My gut feeling and instinct here is that I would be very surprised if Gakpo goes from not being able to train to starting. Could he be in the squad? Yeah, absolutely. We've seen here, according to Slot, who is pretty honest in his pressers, that Gakpo could be in the squad. But you just don't go from not training on a Thursday to then playing a couple of days later and starting, I don't think. So my gut instinct on this is that Gakpo won't start. I think he could be in the squad, but is that enough to keep him? Potentially not. Again, I'll discuss Liverpool and sort of my predicted lineup in the next section. On Matoma, he's fine. Apparently, Hertzler confirmed that it was just cramp that he suffered with and that there's no need to be stressed or worried about that. So if you've got Matoma and you wanted to start him this week, you're absolutely fine to do so. Interestingly, this news cropped up and I wasn't expecting this. Sepp van den Berg will be back training next week and could be available for the weekend against Bournemouth. Do I expect him to come straight back into the 11? If he's back in training on Monday with the team, Tuesday, if he's back training with the team early next week, there is a chance, and I'm not expecting Sepp van den Berg to get anything from an attacking perspective or a clean sheet against Bournemouth when we're all loading up on Bournemouth attackers. I expect that to be a 1 or 2 pointer, maybe even less than that. But if you're really struggling for players and you've got Sepp van den Berg, don't sell him yet because there's a chance. And the Sepp van den Berg bullet header dream could well be alive. On Wolves, I find this one interesting. Pereira's confirmed a few players coming back fit, but the main one from an FPL perspective is actually Agbadou, who's 4 million. So if you are looking for a cheap defender, let's see if he gets any minutes in game week 28 ahead of game week 29 against Southampton. He's not a bad shout if you are really short on funds. If downgrading Trent to Agbadou allows you to go out there and get Haaland, it might be worth a risk worth taking. So let's see what his minutes look like in game week 28. And then just on Solanke returned to the squad for the Europa League game, came off the bench, and then went off injured again. But it wasn't related to his previous injury. Apparently, it was taking a knee in the backside, according to Ange Postecoglou, and he'll be assessed. They have a lot of defensive players maybe returning. So Ben Davies has a chance of returning, and Romero and Van de Ven return to the bench in the Europa League, and apparently they're going to be in the mix for game week 28. So that's really good news. If any of them can get back into the team, maybe it won't be as easy for Bournemouth in terms of scoring goals. Although I still expect definitely Bournemouth to score a few goals there. And then if you missed it, it was sort of snuck in midweek just before the Europa League game. But Ange in his press conference said that Kulusevski is almost definitely out until after the international break. So if you've got Kulusevski in your team, it seems very unlikely that you'll get him for game week 29. So hopefully those are the key updates covered there. Again, if anything happens on Friday, late afternoon, early evening, we'll discuss that on the deadline stream tomorrow. So for now, let's discuss Liverpool in a bit more detail and how much rotation we might expect from them. So the honest but slightly unhelpful answer to the Liverpool rotation question is nobody really knows other than Arne Slot. And we can hypothesize that this player might be fatigued or this player's played a lot of minutes, but there is much more scientific justification for when a player needs a rest. They have got incredible technology now and very, very broad teams with lots of different members of staff that all contribute towards deciding when a player needs a rest. So us sitting here saying this player's played this many minutes, I think they'll get a rest, or I think this, we just don't truly know. But we can, of course, hypothesize. The reason we are worried is, of course, the two PSG legs are straddled either side of that Southampton game. So they've just played what was actually a very difficult game for Liverpool. They probably didn't deserve to win 1-0 other than, as you can see on that SofaScore rating, a 9.4 rating for Alisson. They probably should have lost that game to PSG. So it wasn't an easy game for them. A lot of key players played a lot of minutes. Salah got 85 minutes himself. They've then got the Southampton game on the 7th of March. Then they've got PSG on the 11th. So again, the PSG second leg coming shortly after that Southampton game. And then only 5 days later, they've got the Newcastle EFL Cup final. So there's a lot of key games either side of that Southampton one. So it feels like a prime opportunity to rotate. Then obviously there's that big gap where they've got the FA Cup games. They obviously don't have the FA Cup, but also the international break as well. So largely from game week 30 onwards, I think we're pretty happy in terms of rotation. Really, it's just that Southampton game that we're worried about. I would highly advise going and watching the Arne Slot press conference because he spoke about rotation for a good few minutes. But I think the most representative quote, because I'm seeing people take some quotes. There was part of it where he was like, yeah, we could genuinely rotate. And then there was part of it where he was like, nah, we're probably just going to play our strongest team. But I think the most representative part of it, and again, I highly recommend you watch the entire thing. He said the most important game for us is the one against Southampton. And he re-emphasized this 2 or 3 times. There's no point focusing on PSG. The most important game is right in front of us. And that is a very PR trained answer. But there are lots of managers that truly just view it that way. Like, let's just win the game in front of us. He said, if there was 3, 4, 5 days in between the last game and this one, I'd probably start the same 11 again. And we have seen this with Slot. He doesn't really rotate for the sake of it. So he's saying here, if there was enough time to rest, then we probably would just play our strongest 11. But since there's only 2 days in between and we had to fight really hard, you do take that into account. He then went on to say they've had 50 games in 3 months. And unfortunately, as a result, some players are going to need a rest. So what can we take from this? Honestly, absolutely nothing. My opinion on it, if it's worth anything, is I think we will see small amounts of rotation, but still a very strong starting 11. I don't think we'll see what we've seen from Chelsea in the past, when they play 2 different starting 11s. Liverpool don't really have the squad depth to do that and confidently win. And Southampton actually gave them a bit of a tricky game earlier this season. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see 8 of their strongest starting players play here. So what changes might we see? He did actually pick out Harvey Elliott in the press conference as a player that deserves a start at some point. And with him scoring off the bench, I think Harvey Elliott comes into the starting 11. Who will that be for? My gut instinct is Szoboszlai. Szoboszlai's played a lot of minutes recently, and he has mentioned that Harvey Elliott can play as the 10 or off the right. I don't think Salah will be benched for what it's worth. I think the chances of that are minimal to 0, but he could get an early sub. What we could see is Harvey Elliott start instead of Szoboszlai in the 10, and then Szoboszlai come on for Salah late on, Harvey Elliott go out to the right, and then Harvey Elliott could be a player that can get 90 because he's not played many minutes recently. So I think Harvey Elliott comes in probably for Szoboszlai. It's just a prediction, so sorry if you've got Szoboszlai. It's probably still worth starting him just in case. And I think Darwin's another player that probably does deserve a start. He's not been brilliant, but he obviously created quite well for the Harvey Elliott goal. And I think, therefore, one of Jota and Diaz probably misses out for Darwin. I don't think Gakpo will be fit enough to start, which means one of Diaz or Jota will probably play. And then we might see a few other changes. Could we see Quansah coming on for Konate? Yeah, maybe Konate gets this game as a rest. Maybe we see something like Endo instead of Gravenberch, although I think that's less likely seeing as Gravenberch did get subbed off, and he's so important to that team. I would be really surprised if we see massive wholesale changes where 6 or 7 of the starting 11 don't start. I just don't think he'll take this game for granted. So in terms of the key assets from an FPL perspective, most people probably own Salah and Trent. I think they start. If Bradley was fit, I would be really, really worried. I truly would. I just don't think he starts Quansah at right back. I think if anything, Quansah would start at centre back. And I just think Salah's chasing down every record ever set in the Premier League. And the Premier League isn't one yet. Another 3 points here and they're getting closer. I just think they'd rather wrap up the league sooner rather than later. So I'll leave it there because there's so much hypothesizing. But I think Szoboszlai's a major risk this week. I think Konate's a small one. I think Alisson, Van Dijk should probably start. Trent and Salah I would expect to start too. If you want to take a really cheeky punt for 1 week, I reckon Darwin could get the nod as well. Let me know if you agree with that, Liverpool fans. I think Salah's probably safe. I think he'll get 75 plus minutes. And as a result, I think you can feel safe captaining him. So there were lots of questions coming in around the best defenders to buy. So I've tried to split this into 3 different price brackets, 4 to 4.4, 4.5 to 4.9, and then 5 million plus. And I've also got an overall ranking right at the bottom, which is taken into account value. And just if you've got all the money in the world, who would I target? So in terms of that cheaper bracket, the 3 that I've recommended are 4.4 and then 4.3. I will just give another shout out to Agbadou. Like I said, now he's back. If he goes back into the starting 11, which you would expect, at 4 million, he offers really nice value. Doherty's in there. Doherty's played 8 or 9 90 minutes in a row. He's getting very good minutes at that right centre-back role. With Agbadou back and some other players returning from injury, I suppose there's a chance that he misses out. But I actually think Doherty's been really good in that role. So at 4.3 million, he doesn't offer as much value as if he was playing a really advanced wing-back. But I think he could still be really decent, and he's getting enough minutes at the moment. So I've got him in there. But my number one favoured option at that price below 4.4 is actually Nico Williams. My only concern is he's played a lot of minutes, and they do have Moreno sat there. So could Moreno potentially play one of the games? Maybe. I think if he was going to, would it be Ipswich? I think due to the amount of space between the fixtures, it's probably the Man United game I'd be most worried about. But over the next two, I do just expect Nico Williams to play. Now, this week, it's a rubbish fixture against Manchester City, but in 29, it's against Ipswich. So maybe with 29 more in mind, I really like Nico Williams. But if you need them to start this week, Doherty's arguably a better option to go and buy. And then I've got to give a shout out to Wan-Bissaka. I'm a Man United fan. Wan-Bissaka used to have very little technical ability and end product, but recently he's really improved that, and you can tell he's worked on that as well. West Ham have improved a little bit under Potter. I think largely Wan-Bissaka is just a solid £4.4 million option. So yeah, I like all three of those. But in an ideal world, I think you try and stretch up to that next price bracket, because I think both Ait-Nouri and Milenkovic are just better than Williams and Doherty due to security of minutes and attacking threat. Like Ait-Nouri's attacking threat, even under Vitor Pereira, where he's maybe not quite as advanced, it's still very good. He takes the odd set piece. I think he's probably like third choice penalty taker. So if Strand Larsen wasn't on the pitch, maybe not. And obviously no Cunha. He's taken a couple of penalties in cup competitions, and he's got a good strike on him, but I just think Ait-Nouri is just a really solid option to go out there and get. And I know people will point to the fact there's no Cunha. Might that affect how well they're able to keep the ball and therefore absorb pressure from teams? Maybe. I still think with their fixtures in the Southampton in 29, I think Ait-Nouri is the standout. Milenkovic has actually more attacking threat than any other Forest defender, and he's the most nailed as well. Like, I just can't see a world. Actually, that's a lie. I think Murillo's probably, but I can't see a world where Milenkovic doesn't start the next few games. So I would feel pretty comfortable that he starts, and I think he's probably the standout option after Ait-Nouri at that price point. I've put Semedo in there because Semedo's played pretty much every game this season for Wolves, and he's 4.5. So if you are worried at all about Doherty, or you just want another wing-back option, but you can't afford Ait-Nouri, a cheeky little shout-out to Nelson Semedo, who could offer some value, but I will just note his attacking threat isn't anywhere close to Ait-Nouri. I obviously think that if you can stretch to the more expensive defenders, they are largely quite often the best ones to go for. Gvardiol for me stands out because he's so attacking. Over the last 10 game weeks, he's third for expected goal involvement, only behind Munoz and Trent. So he's very, very attacking. Whether he's playing centre-back or that left wing-back, left wing almost role, he gets forward a lot, and he's so good in the air from set pieces that even if he is playing centre-back, he's got a chance of getting an attacking return. When he does go centre-back rather than left-back, he's also a lot better for baseline bonus. So I don't think it matters too much exactly the role that Gvardiol was playing. And City, over the last 10 game weeks, are up to 5th for expected goals conceded. So I think City are trending in the right direction. Gvardiol is great for bonus points potential and attacking threat. He's got 2 home games in the next 2 against Brighton. That's a lie. After Forest, he's got Brighton and Leicester at home, so 2 home games in a row. I don't think the Forest game is awful for him. I just think Gvardiol, for me, is the standout option if you're looking for a defender. So I'm going to go for Gvardiol, I think, in 29. I'm going to do that by selling Trent. But if you can't afford him this week, I can't believe I'm going to sit here and say this. I spoke about on FPL Therapy. I don't know that I've ever recommended bringing in a player that has a blank the week after if you're not free hitting in that blank. But Munoz is the best defender to own in FPL at the moment. There is absolutely no doubt in my mind he's the best defender to own. Over the last 7 weeks, I think he's got 43 points in that time, which is the most in the Premier League. He's got 7 returns in 7 weeks, which is including clean sheets and attacking returns as well. Palace are up to 3rd over the last 10 for expected goals conceded. So he's playing in a really good defence with tons of attacking threat. And across the next 3 weeks, he's got Ipswich, blank, Southampton. If you are in a position with your team where you've got multiple free transfers, or you just don't have many players blanking in 29, or obviously if you're free hit 29, Munoz has to be the best defender to buy for me. However, I would not be buying Munoz if it's going to force you into a hit in 29. Because is Munoz the best defender? Yes. Do I expect him in 28 and 30 to have the chance for double digits? Yes. But it's not worth forcing a hit because there are other defenders that could also do very well over that time. The only other defender around that price is, of course, Gabriel. Like, some people still don't have an Arsenal defender, and they are still, by far and away, the best defence in the Premier League. Like, by some distance, I would say, whether you look across the last 6, the last 10, or across the whole season. His attacking threat hasn't been great. I think largely because Bukayo Saka's delivery has been a lot of the reason he's got some of the goals he has in the last couple of seasons, but I still think he's worth picking up. If I was then to overall rank the defenders, then it's Gvardiol, then Ait-Nouri, then Munoz. If you don't want to go Munoz, I'd sneak probably Milenkovic into 3rd, but bear in mind that you probably don't want to play Milenkovic this week. Hopefully that's been helpful for you. There are other defenders that, of course, you could consider, but these are largely the ones that I'm looking at. If I was to narrow it down to the 3 that I'm likely to bring in order, it would be Gvardiol, then Aït-Nouri, then Milinkovic. So as well as the defenders, I think a lot of people are making forward transfers this week. There seems to be less midfielder transfers, but let me know if you are making one, and maybe we'll discuss that in more detail on the deadline stream. But yeah, lots of forward transfers. As you can imagine, Mateta being out, Cunha obviously being suspended too. There are doubts around Isak. Some people still own forwards such as Jimenez and João Pedro that they're maybe not as happy with. So who would I buy in terms of the forwards? I think it's very obvious. Haaland is the best forward to own in FPL. At the moment in terms of a buy. You might not think he's worth the money, but if I was to say every single forward is worth the same amount of money, you'd go out there and buy Haaland. So Haaland is the best, but money is important. And some of you might not want to sell Isak. Some of you might not want to sell Palmer or Salah or whoever you have to sell to do it. Or you might only have like one free transfer and already have 4 or 5 players blanking in 29. Going out there and using 2 transfers to then pivot to Haaland probably isn't a good use of those transfers. So is Haaland essential for 29 and 30? Absolutely not. Like, not in any world is Erling Haaland. Not at that price. Even if he was performing at an insane level, I'd still say there's the potential to go against him. However, I do think if you're willing to take the risk, if you've got the transfers or you're happy selling the players that you have to sell to get there, Haaland is arguably the best captain. In fact, I think he is the best captain in 29 against Brighton at home. And then in game week 30, there's certainly an argument that he's the best captain against Leicester at home. Salah's got Everton, but I will almost definitely captain Haaland unless I see something that I really don't like or there are concerns about his minutes or I get that Salah FOMO. But I could be captaining Haaland in 29 and 30. So I think if you are in a position where you also think you could captain him in 29 and 30, he's probably worth going out there and getting. However, let's go under the assumption that you can't get him or you want a forward alongside him. It's difficult to overlook Chris Wood. Finishing ability ridiculous. Really high XG per shot. We've spoken about this. He only really gets big chances. Doesn't have many snapshots or low XG chances. He largely just gets the big ones and he finishes them really well. And Forest is set up in a way to feed Chris Wood the ball and to get him chances. I think against City, Alanga and Hudson-Odoi are going to have a field day against Gvardiol and Rico Lewis, whoever plays right back. And when Alanga and Hudson-Odoi are having fun on their best days, they're getting to the byline and then they're finding Chris Wood. So I think that Chris Wood's got a really good chance in this game. And then after that, he's got Ipswich and Man United. So yeah, Chris Wood would be up there as the second best forward to buy. I've then got Yoane Wissa. Yoane Wissa's fixtures aren't really there, but his underlying data is, and he gets so many chances. And I just come to think, like, I know ifs, buts, and maybes, but he's had 3 disallowed goals in the last few weeks. If those 3 had gone in and Wissa was 3 goals better off, which I think would put him on something like 16 goals in the Premier League this season, I think we'd be talking about him very differently. And we are talking about inches in some of these cases. So I think Wissa has been very unlucky. I think he'll continue to get chances. And I don't think it matters really who Brentford play. Wissa's always going to be in and around the goals. So I'd have him in third. And then in fourth has to be Beto for me. Arguably, he could be higher. The next 2 against Wolves and West Ham are great. He's probably on penalties if Ashley Young's not on the pitch. His minutes have been really good. His underlying data's been good. His finishing's been good. Apart from the Man United game, I've been really impressed actually by his overall finishing ability, and he's taking his chances well. At 5 million, or he might have even snuck up to 5.1 now, but at that cheap price, don't overlook him. Don't overlook him just because he's cheap or just because he's an Everton forward, because what we've seen under Moyes has been really good. I've got Marmoush in 5th. There's a world in which I say Marmoush is way too low, and there's also a world in which I say he's probably a bit too high in this list. Eye test-wise, fantastic. Talent-wise, absolutely there. He takes quite a few set pieces, actually, for Man City as well. He started every Premier League game since being in the Premier League with Man City, and you'd expect him to continue getting decent minutes. But he doesn't seem to get 90, at least not on a regular basis. He's not on penalties. And a lot of the good work that Marmoush does, if you watch, is kind of on the edge of the box or just out to the left. And you don't really need that or want that. It's a bit similar to what we've seen from João Pedro in the past, or even Iliman Ndiaye. They're doing a lot of their fancy footwork outside the box, which isn't helpful from an FPL perspective. So I just think with Marmoush, I wonder if his brilliance and his technical ability will actually translate into FPL points. That's my only concern with him. But he's still got the same fixtures that I mentioned for Haaland. He is incredibly talented with the set pieces, and he's gone out there and got a hat-trick already. Like, he's shown that he's got that in his locker. You could definitely do worse than Marmoush. I actually think Evanilson's arguably a little bit low. Like, I really like the shout of Evanilson, because if you ask Bournemouth fans, they think he starts the next 3. FPL Schofield, Brad, who we interviewed on FPL Therapy, he thinks that Evanilson starts the next 3 games. Bournemouth's fixtures are unbelievable, right? Spurs, Brentford, Ipswich, 2 of them being at home. If Evanilson does start the next 3, I like him a lot. In fact, if you could confirm he starts the next 3, I'd maybe chuck him up into like 3rd. My concern is you don't know that he starts the next 3. He has just come back from injury. Dango can start. They've played Sinistera there as well. And even if he does start, how many minutes is he getting? Is he going to get subbed at 70 for, again, Sinistera or for Brooks or for Dango Watara? We just don't know exactly what his minutes look like. Also, he's not on penalties unless Kluivert's not on the pitch. And often, I think Kluivert and Evanilson will probably come off around the same sort of time. I like Evanilson a lot. Don't overlook him. And if you're not loaded up on Bournemouth already, you could definitely do worse. After that, you've got the likes of Strand Larsen. I just think without Cunha, they are going to be much weaker. His underlying data is rubbish across the season. He barely gets any goal-scoring chances. And so I'd need to see a little bit more. Listen, maybe they'll set up in a way now under Vitor Pereira without Cunha. They look brilliant. And Strand Larsen's getting all the chances. I just don't believe that until I see it, sadly. And then with like João Pedro Welbeck, Brighton's fixtures are a bit of a mixed bag. You just don't know about their minutes. Like both of them could conceivably sit a game out. And then you've got other options like Nketiah, 1 week punt. Could be cheeky, but then Mateta's back. Delap, not that interested. I just don't think Ipswich create enough chances. Jimenez could rotate with Moniz, and Solanke's obviously picked up a small niggle as well. So, yeah, I think anyone in that top 6 are fantastic. I don't really like 7 and downwards particularly. I would try and get Haaland if you can next week. If you don't fancy that, I'd go for Wood. Or if you want to be a little bit more differential, Wissa, Better, Marmoush, Evanilson are all great options. So I wasn't actually going to discuss this because I think it's going to be more of a talking point for Game Week 29, but I also do realise that it might affect your transfer strategy this week. So there were lots of questions coming in around blank Game Week 29, and these are the questions we get every year. It's essentially, do you need to field 11 players? Is it worth taking a hit to field 11? Is it worth selling players that you actually quite like either side just in order to deal with 29? And I'll be honest, there is no right answer. There's no exact science to this, but I would try and not overemphasize the importance of 1 week. That being, if you take a small red arrow in Game Week 29, but you know that your build up to 29 has been fantastic because you've owned players like Mateta, Munoz, and you hold some really good players like Mateta, like Munoz, like Isak, through to Game Week 30 and beyond, or Rodgers or Trent, you hold a few more of them, and then you know that means you're almost like more likely to get more green arrows from 30 onwards, then it's probably worth sacrificing 29 slightly. So the straight up answer to, do you need 11 players? No. The next answer to, do you need to take hits? No, you don't. That being said, you also don't want to go completely just like, don't care about 29. It'll be fine. And then I'll just, because you can get a mighty red arrow in a blank game week if you don't at least try to put together a semi-decent team. My motto with blank game weeks has always been quality over quantity. And what I'm trying to essentially get at there, if you look at your team for every single week across the season, every week there are 3 or 4 players that get between 1 and 2 points. It's very rare that all of your players return. You'll get like 1 with 1. Maybe one player gets a cameo appearance, then gets like Robinson got a 0-pointer, and then Dango got a 2-pointer last week. Like, it's never the case that all of your players return and do well for you. So what I would more so focus on is, do you have the 7 or 8 key players for blank game week 29? And what I mean there is, do you have a Bournemouth attacker? Do you own maybe a Gvardiol? Do you have Chris Wood and maybe an Erling Haaland? Do you have those key players that you think can do damage and have a really high points potential? If you have 9 players, but the 9 players you have are all excellent, that is better than me with 11 players that kind of stink. My 11 players at the moment include Vandenberg, Enzo, and Dango. They're rubbish. They're not going to get me many points. So if you have 9, but your 9 are better than my 11, you'll probably outscore me. So don't focus on the number 11. Focus on instead getting those key assets in place. And also try and think about, do they help you from 30 onwards? For me, buying Semenyo not only helps me in 29, but it gives me a player against Ipswich in 30. So also you need to think about your strategy after blank game week 29. The question around, is it better to take hits in a blank game week? Yes. Assuming that you're taking out a blanking player that you don't necessarily want for 30. Because if you're taking out, let's say, Morgan Rogers, not a perfect fixture in 30, maybe you don't want him, maybe you want to switch to Asensio moving forward. So you're removing a player that you don't want for 29 and beyond, and he's going to get you 0 points. So if you take a -4 hit to replace Rogers, and the player that you bring in gets you 2 points, you've only lost 2 points as opposed to the 4 you might normally lose. So yeah, it is slightly better to take a hit in a blank game week, but you are still losing points, and you do still need that player to return to justify the hit. Let's say you bring in Semenyo, and Semenyo gets you 6 points, and you took a hit to take out Rodgers for Semenyo. Well, you've only gained 2 points. It's not a massive win there in terms of game week 29. So I wouldn't say like disregard hits and just take as many as you want because it's a blank week, but they are slightly more beneficial to your team as a result, assuming you're taking out a player that blanks. There was also questions around the goalkeepers. So lots of people have maybe like an Alisson in net or someone like that. Is it worth making a goalkeeper transfer? I think this depends when you're planning on playing your wildcard and how much you feel like you might need a goalkeeper in the slightly longer term. I think if you're wildcarding in 30 or 31, I would be semi-tempted to just take it as a 10-player, not make the move. Because let's say you sell Alisson for Jose Sarr, and Jose Sarr gets you 6 points. You've gained 2 points there. And then for game week 30, who would you prefer, Alisson or Jose Sarr? You'd prefer Alisson, right? So in most cases, I don't love a -4 for a goalkeeper. But again, in a blank week, it's not as bad. I'll leave it there because I think it's more of a discussion for game week 29. But at the end of the day, like 1 week, it doesn't make a huge difference in your season. But if you can have a good surrounding period before and after, that's probably more important. So guys, just to finish up with my final thoughts around my team based on the stuff that we got in the press conferences and also just the stuff that I've been thinking about as well. I think I am going to roll this week. I am worried about Isak, but worst case scenario, if Isak misses out, I get Robinson. I mean, I don't want to play a 4-5-1 at all, especially considering one of the players in my starting 11 is Dango, but that situation, I suppose the concern is if any of my players miss out altogether as well as Isak, if he were to miss out, then I am all of a sudden in a position where I've only got 10 players. And I know I just said that having 10 players doesn't matter, but ideally in a week that isn't a blank week, you wouldn't have 10. So I just think that I would rather wait a week and have all of my transfers ready to use before 29, where I have an extra week of information. Because let's say Salah picked up an injury, that might change everything in terms of how I approach the week. Let's say that Chris Wood picked up an injury. Then I might say, do you know what? I might actually hold Mateta rather than selling Mateta. Hope that makes sense. Or, and I know this is all depending upon hypothetical injuries that won't happen, but if any of the Bournemouth attackers got injured, even Ilson picks up an injury again or got re-injured, which I really hope it doesn't happen, or Cliver or Semenyo picked up an issue or got suspended, for example, Dango probably then starts in the blank. So as much as I do think a transfer this week would help me, I think selling Mateta to then bench Dango or selling Dango himself for Semenyo or Cliver, that probably would benefit my team. I would just kick myself if that transfer ends up backfiring and then I've got one less transfer to deal with blank game week 29. So I think the key decisions for me is, do I want to take captaincy off Salah, which I don't think I'm going to because I think he plays at least 75 minutes. And then that's really it, I guess. Do I want to make a transfer? I've got 3 free transfers and 1.9 million in the bank. If I were to make one, I think it's Dango to Semenyo, which is still something I am slightly tempted by. Just fix the mistake, get rid of the slightly worse asset. But then, again, if we're surprised and maybe Dango just randomly starts ahead of Tavernier. We don't think that will happen, but let's say he does. I'd be so upset that I made that move. The other option I've got is rather than going for Haaland now, go from Mateta to anyone I want up to 9.2. And honestly, it probably would be Wissa, because I think he's been super unlucky, and I think people are not looking at him enough just because of the disallowed goals and the fact that he's been a little bit unfortunate. So could do something like that. I could also just take a bit of a punt on like a Marmouche as well. I know I said I don't love it, but I suppose if there's a chance I don't end up getting Haaland, but I think the fixtures are so good for City that I want to attack them, that's an option, especially this fixture in 30. But I think the plan as of right now is to sell Mateta in 29 in order to afford Haaland. So I'll leave it there. It's nice and simple for me this week. I'm going to try and roll. If we get news late on Friday that there might be an injury that we didn't realise or Isak is a genuine doubt, then on the deadline stream there is a chance of me making an attacking transfer. So guys, there you have it. That is my Game Week 28 deadline decisions. Hopefully you have enjoyed. And if you had, please do make sure to smash that like button. And if you've got to this point and you're not yet subscribed, please do that. It would really, really help me out. We're trying to hit 150,000 subscribers and we are getting closer and closer. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, which will be the deadline stream tomorrow. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.